Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. The Pakistan Army says the unfortunate rise in violent incidents on both sides of the Pakistan-Afghanistan border is meant to derail the Afghan peace process. In a tweet, the military's media wing said Pakistan believes that both the countries deserve peace and progress. It said Pakistan and Afghanistan will jointly defeat spoilers of the peace process. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi told the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that it is imperative to identify those spoilers. Greece has called on the European Union to impose economic sanctions on Turkey if it doesn't stop drilling in the eastern Mediterranean. Speaking in Brussels, Greece's Deputy Foreign Minister Miltiades Varvisiostis said Turkey must remove its military vessels from waters of Cyprus. Meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron says the EU countries must unite on unacceptable Turkish behavior. The European Parliament has removed Myanmar's leader Aung San Suu Kyi from Sakharov Prize community. In a tweet, Parliament spokesman said the decision was made because of her inaction over state crimes against Rohingya. Over 700,000 Rohingya, mostly Muslims, fled to neighboring Bangladesh after a bloody crackdown in 2017 by the Myanmar military. India has registered 1,172 deaths and more than 95,000 infections overnight, the world's highest single-day surge so far. Meanwhile, Pakistan, 6 people have lost their lives to the virus overnight, taking the toll to 6,365 with nearly 300,000 cases. The coronavirus has claimed more than 900,000 lives and infected nearly 28 million people across the globe. For the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break, stay tuned. Welcome back, and now with the news in detail. Pakistan has urged the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to oppose any illegal measures to change the status of the disputed territories. Addressing the Foreign Ministers' Council meeting of the bloc in Moscow, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said changing the status of disputed territories is a violation of the UN Security Council resolutions. He said it is imperative to identify the spoilers of the Afghan peace process. Qureshi urged the SCO not to allow any country to use terrorism-related allegations as a political tool to malign and victimize any country, religion or race. On the sidelines of the moot, Qureshi held bilateral meetings with his Russian and Chinese counterparts. They discussed bilateral ties and issues concerning regional peace, including the Afghan reconciliation process and the Kashmir dispute. The foreign minister said the China-Pakistan economic corridor is vital for regional connectivity. The Pakistan Army says the unfortunate rise in violent incidents on both sides of the Pakistan-Afghanistan border is meant to derail the Afghan peace process. In a tweet, the military's media wing said Pakistan believes that both the countries deserve peace and progress. It said Pakistan and Afghanistan will jointly defeat spoilers of the peace process. In a speech on the 13th of August, the military's media wing spokesman, Major General Babar Iftikhar, pointed to India's involvement in destabilizing peace in the region.
पाकिस्तान ने अफगानिस्तान में अमन की बहाली के लिए भरपूर किरदार अदा किया और उम्मीद करते हैं कि वहां रिकन्सिलिएशन प्रोसेस की कोशिशें जल्द कामयाब होंगी। एक हालिया यूएन रिपोर्ट में हिंदुस्तान में दहशतगर्द ग्रुप्स की मौजूदगी की निशानदही की गई। हिंदुस्तान इन दहशतगर्द ग्रुप्स को हमसाया ममालिक बिलखसूस पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ और खित्ते में अदम इस्तेहकाम के लिए इस्तेमाल कर रहा है।
For more on this, we are joined by former diplomat Mr. Salman Bashir. Thank you for your time at Indus News. Pointing to India's negative role in Afghanistan, Pakistan has repeatedly warned against spoilers of the peace process. Today, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi brought the attention of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization towards the issue. So why is India trying to sabotage the peace process aimed at ending the lingering conflict in Afghanistan?
Well, I think Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi made a very succinct statement at the SCO. And he's mentioned possible spoilers within and from around Afghanistan. And I think the clear reference was to the negative role India has continued to play. And I think it is important that this forum, the Shanghai Cooperation, of which both Pakistan and India are members, together with China and Russia significantly, were to create the necessary consensus, political consensus at the regional level, which is very much needed at this point to support the process for peace and stability in Afghanistan. India has been negative because they have used Afghanistan as a sort of a base to create trouble within Pakistan by supporting these militant elements who have carried out acts of sabotage and terror in Pakistan. So it is a sort of an encirclement policy that the Indians have followed, for which Afghanistan becomes of some use to them, but that is at a very high cost for peace and stability and unity.
Mr. Bashir, experts say India is the principal backer of Afghan President Ashraf Ghani after his controversial victory in the presidential elections. They believe India was behind Ghani's reluctance to abide by the peace deal, including the prisoner swap agreed in the US-Taliban deal. How do you think President Ashraf Ghani's role in the peace process has been?
Well, Ashraf Ghani is still the president, and I think Pakistan has done everything, to have a good communication line with him and his government. But of course, objectively speaking, I think the problem is that Ashraf Ghani and others stand to lose a lot if there is eventually some sort of an agreement for peace, which is broad-based. So those who have been in power in Afghanistan are seen as possible spoilers, so to say. I think there are irritants between Ashraf Ghani and Mr. Abdullah, and but that is the fact, that is the reality of politics of the day in Afghanistan. But as I see it, there is a bigger question. Afghanistan has been a broken country for decades now. The question is it possible to mend it? And if so, then what is the best way, especially for the region and the immediate neighbors? So I think we have a lot at stake in terms of stability in Afghanistan. And one thing that I think ought to be sort of highlighted in this is the question of development and socio-economic progress of Afghanistan, because without a firm economic foundation, it will be rather naive to assume that we could have durable stability and peace. And even the foundations for a political settlement must have some sort of economic base. So I hope that aspect will also receive some attention at TSCO.
So what are the options left with Pakistan and the other facilitators of the peace process if India continues to play its negative role in Afghanistan?
Well, actually, you see, if you are bent on playing a negative role, then at the end you yourself get hurt. And it is quite clear that by adopting a certain negative and rather hostile attitude, the Indians have succeeded in isolating themselves within the region, generally speaking, broadly speaking. So it's high time that India realize that this sort of an attitude which is hegemonic, which is based on arrogance, which is based on certain notions of India as a regional global power, do not carry any resonance, and are in fact resisted by the states of the region and the people of the region generally.
Mr. Salman Bashir, former diplomat, thank you for joining at Indus News. We really appreciate that. And to talk more about this, we are joined by Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi, retired. As Pakistan brought the Taliban to the negotiating table with world powers to find a negotiated settlement in Afghanistan, India is playing otherwise. General, not only Pakistan, but the United States as well as United States fear India in creating impediments in the way of intra-Afghan talks. This issue was raised by Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi at the SCO meeting earlier in the day. So what's your say on this?
I think it's quite obvious, because if you look at the Indian interests, which also coincide, unfortunately, with the American interests, that is that CPAC should not get its full potential. China should not get an access in Afghanistan. Russia should, I mean, this is the American, I'm saying Russian, maybe Indians are not very averse to that. So India, instead of joining this very great opportunity, as the region is likely to prosper, Iran can join us and India join us, and Afghanistan can become a gateway through of Central Asia, and all traffic can go up to Indian Ocean. It is just because of their one animosity with China, animosity with Pakistan, and their alliance with America. These are the main factors, and that is the main reason that why they have become detractors rather than supporting this peace process. But I'm quite confident, if I just list the detractors, India being on the top of it, and maybe ISIL and Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan, the gun runners, the narcotic barons. This is the group which would not like, and maybe certain elements within the establishment, Afghan establishment. But most the elements which would like to have peace, the largest of them are the Afghan people. They are fed up. They want peace. Then all the Afghan neighbors, Pakistan, Iran, Central Asian countries, China, Russia. So I think those who want peace, they are much larger in number, and they are likely to prevail. And that is exactly what Foreign Minister reiterated at SCO's platform. And we all know that earlier he was in Shanghai also. And as the talks are progressing, we can see that ultimately they might cross the threshold in 1 or 2 months' time, that even the new establishment in USA may not be able to reverse it. So I'm quite confident that they will cross that threshold by November, by December, and Indians will not be able to do anything. Yes, one thing which they are doing, which is very sad, that they are taking full advantage of these last few weeks which are available with them. You see attacking in the Balochistan area and in erstwhile Fata area. So that is all very sad, but in my assessment, ultimately, Pakistan and the other neighbors, Afghanistan, they are going to prevail. The peace is going to prevail, because the bloc that requires peace, that are vying for peace, is much stronger as compared to the detractors.
So, General Lodi, officials and diplomatic sources say U.S. also fears India is creating impediments in the way of intra-Afghan talks. In May, U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad traveled to New Delhi in an apparent attempt to restrain India from creating hurdles in peace process. So what's your say on this?
You know, one thing is well known to everyone, in diplomatic terms, also in diplomatic circles. You can't really make out what actually is going on, the undercurrents, whatever actually is going on under the table. Whereas USA may be saying that they fear that India will spoil the peace process. About USA, I will say two things. I'm a straight general and not a politician and neither a diplomat. Whereas USA may be interested, and they are very much interested, that their own exit from Afghanistan should be peaceful. Whether they want peaceful Afghanistan after they leave, I have my doubts. Because once I see their interests in the region, where they would not like to see CPAC flowering, they would not like to see influence of China and Russia in this region. So I think they would like to have some influence even after leaving in Afghanistan, and that influence will be, let me say, openly is likely to be negative, and they would like to see Afghanistan in turmoil. They only want a peace for some time so that they can exit. So I do not know whether India is playing American game or their own game. I can't say that.
General Lodi, last month, veteran Afghan politician Gulbuddin Hikmatyar said India is supporting the Afghan government to sabotage the Afghan peace process. He said India's actions will have dangerous consequences for Afghanistan. So what could be these consequences Hikmatyar was referring to?
I think that the first thing is that, as I also indicated, that there could be certain elements within the Afghan establishment who may not be happy with this accord, because, leaving your status, leaving all the perks and privileges which you are enjoying now, it is not an easy thing. What Hikmatyar was indicating is that whereas Taliban are abiding by all the clauses which they have, decided with the Americans, they have not yet decided anything as far as the Afghan government is concerned. And they are quite strong. They are in numbers, and they have political support. They have people support. They control a lot of area. So the Afghan government must evaluate that once the Americans leave, what will be their position within Afghanistan. And I think he was hinting at that if Afghan government agrees to the thing that is good for them, otherwise the things might turn very ugly.
Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi, retired, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. And now moving on, Pakistan has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to register its protest over ceasefire violations by Indian troops along the line of control. 3 civilians were injured in unprovoked Indian fighting in the Badouri sector on Tuesday. In a statement, the Foreign Office said the Indian forces have been deliberately targeting civilian population along the LOC. It said these actions reflect India's wish to escalate tensions at the LOC. 17 civilians have been killed in nearly 2,200 ceasefire violations by Indian forces this year. 2 Indian commandos and 5 Maoist fighters have been killed in a gunfight in the eastern state of Orissa. Police said the SOG commandos of the Indian Army came under fire during an intelligence-based operation against the fighters in Kalahandi district. They said 6 weapons and Maoist literature were recovered from the spot, while further combing operations are underway. This is the 3rd such anti-Maoist operation in the same forest area since July. Kalahandi is among 10 districts in the state with Maoist presence. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Yemen's Houthi rebels claim they have attacked an important target in the Saudi capital Riyadh using a ballistic missile and drones. Houthis military spokesman said the group used a ballistic missile and 3 drones in the attack. The Saudi-led coalition has not yet responded to the Houthis' claim, but said that they have destroyed a bomb-laden drone in the Najran city. The Saudi-led coalition has been at war with the Houthis since the ouster of the government of President Abdurabu Mansour Hadi. Iranian armed forces have begun an annual naval exercise near the strategic Strait of Hormuz. State media said the units from the Navy, Air Force and ground forces are taking part in the drills. It said the submarines and drones are also being used to test missiles and torpedoes. Military Commander Admiral Habibullah Sayyari will head the annual drills. Addressing the opening ceremony, Sayyari said the exercises are aimed at improving readiness in confronting foreign threats. India has registered 1,172 deaths and more than 95,000 infections overnight, the world's highest single-day surge so far. The coronavirus has claimed more than 900,000 lives and infected nearly 28 million people across the globe. More in this report.
The new coronavirus is showing no signs of abating in India. The country has become the virus epicenter with more than 75,000 total deaths and over 4.4 million positive cases. The virus is now spreading through the Southeast Asian region, shutting down Indonesia's Jakarta. The capital has announced to reinstate restrictions similar to those imposed from April until June.
Right now, we are in an emergency situation, more pressing than before the start of the pandemic. Therefore, do not leave homes unless you are forced to, and do not leave Jakarta when it is unnecessary.
Europe is reconsidering imposing travel restrictions as the disease returns in number to France, Italy, Spain and the UK. In Australia, unrest and frustration is growing over lockdown and nighttime curfew in the state of Victoria, where cases refuse to go down. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison says he had booked a massive stash of vaccine ahead of the time to give his countrymen hope.
They need some hope today, and particularly in Victoria they need some hope today. And so that is what we're here to deliver today. Today we take another significant step to protect the health of Australians against the coronavirus pandemic. A $1.7 billion agreement for the supply and production of more than 80 million vaccine doses.
Japan is considering lowering the alert level in the capital, Tokyo, because of a considerable reduction in cases. Meanwhile, South Korea continues to grapple with new clusters, adding to the community in the country.
In Pakistan, the number of active COVID-19 cases has reduced to 5,540. The Health Ministry says nearly 288,000 patients have recovered so far. The ministry said the country's death toll rose by 6 to 6,365. It said 441 people tested positive for the virus in the last 24 hours, taking the count of the confirmed cases to over 299,000. Sindh remains the most affected province with over 131,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 97,000 cases so far. Greece has called on the European Union to impose economic sanctions on Turkey if it doesn't stop drilling in the eastern Mediterranean. Speaking in Brussels, Deputy Foreign Minister Miltiadis Varvisiotis said Turkey must remove its military vessels and gas drilling ships from waters of Cyprus. He said Europe is here to negotiate but will also defend its values. Meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron said European countries should have a more unified position regarding Turkey's unacceptable behavior. He said the EU wants to avoid escalation of tensions with Ankara. Turkey's foreign ministry said Macron's statements are the reflection of his incompetence and despair. Arab League has dropped a draft Palestinian resolution condemning the last month's normalization deal between Israel and the UAE, but it reaffirmed the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, which conditions normalization with Israel on complete withdrawal to pre-1967 borders. Palestine's Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki said the deal has undermined the position of Arab states on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister called for the establishment of a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Faisal bin Farhan Saud said Riyadh supports all the efforts to reach a comprehensive solution to the dispute. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has repledged U.S. support for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in their efforts to contain COVID-19. In a video conference with his counterparts from ASEAN countries, Pompeo said the U.S. will help the bloc alleviate coronavirus impact on their economies. Pompeo said America is working to support its friends in the region and the ASEAN countries can count on the U.S.
The United States has also devoted new resources to help ASEAN countries face the current pandemic, as well as future ones. As Foreign Minister of Singapore encouraged last night, the ASEAN Public Health Emergency Coordination System, through $1.5 million in funding from the State Department, will increase ASEAN's ability to respond as a region to emerging public health crises.
Russia, Japan, Australia, South Korea and India also joined the event hosted by Vietnam that will include a 27-nation security forum. Now moving on, the European Parliament has removed Myanmar's State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi from the Sakharov Prize community. In a tweet, a Parliament spokesperson, Yuam Jok, said the decision sanctions Suu Kyi's inaction over crimes against the Rohingya community. Myanmar faces charges of genocide at the UN's top court over a crackdown against the Rohingya in 2017. Some 750,000 Muslim Rohingya fled to neighboring Bangladesh to flee widespread murder, rape and arson. The Rohingya are widely seen as illegal immigrants in Myanmar with no citizenship and basic rights. China has accused the US of spreading political virus at a UN Security Council meeting. The altercation took place during a UNSC meeting to discuss the implementation of a resolution on COVID-19. US envoy Rodney Hunter accused China of mishandling the COVID-19, saying Beijing is responsible for the spread of the virus globally. In response, China's deputy representative to the UN, Geng Shuang, said Washington's envoy is abusing the UNSC platform. Geng said Washington focused on the health and livelihood of the American people. He said Beijing took comprehensive measures to control the spread of the pandemic in a timely, transparent and responsible manner.
The U.S. representative was absolutely abusing the Security Council platform, was abusing today's meeting. They are spreading political virus. What they are doing here is simply to serve their domestic politics. The administration in this country, they do not focusing on fighting pandemic, but trying their best to shift attention and blaming others.
Washington has repeatedly accused Beijing covering up the outbreak of the novel coronavirus last year. Now moving on, China has accused the US of political persecution and racial discrimination after it revoked the visas of Chinese students and researchers. At a news briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said Washington's move violates the rights of the students. Li Jian said Beijing reserves the right for the further reaction. This comes after Washington cancelled over 1,000 visas of Chinese academics, citing security risks. A U.S. Homeland Security official, Chad Wolf, alleged the targeted students had ties with the Chinese military. Wolf said the move was to prevent researchers from allegedly stealing sensitive research amid suspicions of espionage by Beijing. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says any potential US-UK trade deal will not pass the Congress if London undermines the Good Friday Agreement. In a statement, Pelosi said the UK must respect the Northern Ireland Protocol as signed with the EU to ensure the free flow of goods across the border. She said the US Congress will proudly defend the Good Friday Agreement. Pelosi said the agreement is treasured by the American people. The Good Friday Pact mandates free trade between Northern Ireland and mainland Britain, but the EU says the border should require checks in some cases. Ukraine says its border remains open for Belarusians, but Kiev will respond strongly against any attempts by Russia to abuse it. Speaking in Lisbon, Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said strengthening of Russia's position in Belarus is a threat to Ukraine's security. Kuleba said Ukraine wants an independent and sovereign Belarus where democracy can flourish. Belarus has been rocked by mass protests since the re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko in a disputed poll. Serbia has suspended its participation in all military exercises with foreign partners for 6 months. In a statement, Defense Minister Alexander Vulin said the country is facing enormous and undeserved pressure from the EU. Vulin said the bloc has asked Belgrade to leave the planned military exercise with Belarus. The Defense Minister said the country will not take part in any exercises, whether it is with NATO or Russia. He said Serbia's participation in peacekeeping operations will also be reconsidered. The joint Russian-Serbian Belarusian military exercises are scheduled from today in Belarus. 7 people have died in wildfires in Washington, Oregon and California with recent heat waves and high winds-driven blazes. Officials said fires have damaged hundreds of buildings, forcing thousands of people to flee their homes. They said fires have burned more than 2.5 million acres of land in California, 480,000 acres in Washington, and 300,000 in Oregon. California Highway Patrol says the fast-moving Bear Fire has carved a 25-mile path of destruction through the mountainous terrain. Over in Oregon, 3 people were confirmed dead as fires destroyed 5 small towns. Oregon Governor Kate Brown says the disaster can be the worst wildfire tragedy in the state's history. Authorities warn the death toll can rise as the wildfires are projected to worsen in the coming days. In Mexico, 2 people have been killed in clashes with the military police during a demonstration against a dam that diverts the water to the U.S. In a statement, Mexico's National Guard said the assailants attacked its unit and were killed during the gunfight. The citizens of the drought-hit state of Chihuahua said they are protesting plans to divert additional water across the border. The demonstrators threw rocks at the security troops and eventually occupied the closing spillway gates of the La Boquilla Dam. During a news conference, Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador called the violence regrettable. Mexico is forced to divert additional water to the U.S. under the 1944 bilateral treaty that regulates the water sharing between the 2 countries. Now, the floods have killed at least 13 people and injured 19 others in Burkina Faso following days of heavy rains across the country. Government officials said the floods have caused massive damage and have displaced thousands. The officials say the Territorial Administration Ministry is working to provide people with a shelter in public buildings. They said the Finance Ministry will allocate $9 million to help flood victims. Torrential rains over the past week have devastated parts of Niger, Senegal and Cameroon, killing dozens and displacing tens of thousands. Amnesty International says Myanmar's military gets billions of dollars from a secretive Myanmar business conglomerate. Amnesty said its investigations into Myanmar economic holdings limited shows the military has received dividends of as much as $18 billion from the Yangon-based company over the years. The international rights group said the entire board of the company is made of senior military officials. The Amnesty's business head said perpetrators of some of the worst human rights violations in Rohingya genocide benefit from these business activities. Mark Dummett said Myanmar's government should use the profits of this military company to compensate the families of genocide victims. Fires at Greece's largest migrant camp have left nearly 13,000 people without shelter. The blazes completely gutted the overcrowded camp, which was designed for fewer than 3,000 people. Greek officials say many of the migrants will be temporarily placed on ships at a nearby port or in tents flown in from Athens. About 400 teenagers and children have been transferred to the mainland. Greek Migration Minister Notis Mitirachi says about 2,000 people might not have access to a shelter. He said authorities are working to provide emergency accommodation near the Moria campsite. It is unclear how the fires began, with some blaming the migrants and others blaming Greek officials. A report by the Worldwide Fund for Nature says the wildlife populations have fallen by more than 2/3 in less than 50 years. The report says the catastrophic decline shows no sign of slowing, and it warns that nature is being destroyed by humans at a rate never seen before. It said the deforestation and trade of wildlife are some of the drivers behind the unprecedented decline. The report looked at thousands of different wildlife species monitored by the conservation scientists in habitats across the world. The average size of the wildlife populations has fallen by 2/3 in less than 50 years as forests were felled to grow food. The World Wildlife Fund raises a stark warning and calls for saving nature in order to save humans.
Conservation scientists monitored almost 21,000 populations of nearly 4,400 vertebrate species, giving an overview of the state of the natural world. They say land conversion for farming and the wildlife trade were key reasons for the 68% drop in populations between 1970 and 2016. The WWF report says the human activity severely degraded 3/4 of all land and 40% of the Earth's oceans. It warns continued natural habitat loss hikes the risk of future pandemics as humans expanded their contact with wild animals. WWF Director General Marco Lambertini says serious decline in wildlife indicate nature is unraveling and the earth is flashing red warning signs of systems failure.
A UN report says concentrations of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere hit a record high this year. The report showed economic slowdown amid the coronavirus pandemic had little lasting effect. More in this report.
The greenhouse gases have regained their control in the world, making atmosphere hotter and harmful for the population. A report by the World Meteorological Organization says climate warming is now at its highest level in 3 million years. The report details how climate change is expected to put hundreds of millions of more people at risk of flooding.
At the same time, we have seen the main greenhouse gas concentrations to grow. Especially, we have broken records in concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide. And out of those, carbon dioxide is the most important because it has contributed 2/3 of the warming.
After declining sharply this spring, global emissions of greenhouse gases are now nearly back to pre-pandemic levels. Daily emissions fell in April by 17% relative to the previous year. But by early June, as factories reopened, emissions were back up to within 5% of 2019 levels. The head of World Meteorological Organizations, Patri Talas, says the drop in the emissions this year is not going to change the big picture.
We have seen a drop in the emissions this year because of the COVID crisis and lockdowns in many countries, and we expect that this year the emissions will be 4 to 7% lower than the emissions last year. But this is not going to change the big picture because of the extremely long lifetime of carbon dioxide, and we have continued seeing records in atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide.
The number of people living in water-scarce areas by mid-century is now estimated to reach up to 3.2 billion, up from the previous estimate of about 1.9.
A monk in Myanmar has taken social responsibility to cut the plastic waste in his neighborhood. Around 2,500 tons of trash was being thrown out every day in Yangon. Now it is used to produce utensils, sunshades and even shelters. More about our rather beautiful plastic world in this report.
Abed Otamasara, who runs a meditation center in Yangon, noticed a surge in plastic waste during the pandemic. He launched a recycling drive and was taken aback by the response. Helped by dozens of volunteers, his team now receives several thousand used plastic bottles a day from the community. These plastic containers are now being used as a substitute for bowls at his monastery to feed thousands of people in need.
The plastic waste can be used to build streets and for construction. That's why we save our daily plastic waste into the plastic bottle to donate to him.
The 9-acre meditation center hosts workshops to process plastic waste. Volunteers used hanging plastic bottles to make sunshades. They have even constructed a shelter using car tires packed with plastic waste and cement to form the walls. Otamasara estimates 2 tons of plastic waste, or around 200,000 plastic bottles, have been recycled so far.
These people who help me cut the bottles are meditation practitioners at my center. With their assistance, I have used hundreds of thousands of plastic bottles to make items. It has saved me an estimated $10,000 on buying new bowls.
The monk says he intends to continue using the waste for any necessary structure at his meditation centers, not only to share awareness but also to partially solve the waste problem.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. The US stocks are trading higher as tech shares continue their rebound following a torrid 3-day sell-off. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is trading 0.5% higher. The S&P 500 has also gained about 0.5%. And the Nasdaq Composite Index is trading upward by over 1%. Meanwhile, oil prices slid after data showed US crude stockpiles unexpectedly rose last week. In the National Basketball Association, the Los Angeles Clippers and Toronto Raptors have won their playoff games at the NBA's biosecure bubble near Disney World in Florida. Clippers beat Denver Nuggets by 96 points to 85 in Game 4 to take a 3-1 lead in the 7-game Western Conference semi-final series. LA's shooting guard Kawhi Leonard posted 30 points, 11 rebounds and 9 assists to leave Clippers one with from progression. Denver had to overcome a similar 3-1 deficit in the first round against the Utah Jazz before winning 3 games in a row. Earlier, holders Toronto downed Boston Celtics by 125 to 122 in double overtime in Game 6 of their Eastern Conference semi-final series. The Raptors' point guard Kyle Lowry hit 33 points, while Boston's shooting guard Jaylen Brown led with 31 points and 16 rebounds. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.